Everyone on YouTube talks about how Linux is fast, free, secure, customizable, and better than Windows in almost every way. You hear about performance boosts, privacy freedom, no forced updates, no bloatware, and total control. And honestly, a lot of that is true, but today we're not talking about the shiny side. We're not talking about the freedom, the open source philosophy, or the passionate community. Today we're talking about the dark side of Linux, the part no one warns you about before you wipe your Windows installation and dive in headfirst, thinking everything will just magically work. Let's start with the first shock most new users experience: choice overload. On Windows, you don't choose your desktop environment. You don't choose your package manager. You don't choose your display server. You install Windows, and that's it. With Linux, suddenly you're faced with dozens of distributions: Ubuntu, Fedora, Arch, Debian, Linux Mint, OpenSUSE Pop, _OS, and hundreds more. Then you learn each one comes with different desktop environments like GNOME, KDE, XFCE, Cinnamon. And then you find out that even within one distro, you can swap almost everything. For beginners, that freedom doesn't feel empowering. It feels overwhelming. You start wondering if you chose the wrong distro. You see someone online saying, you should have gone with Arch. Another says, Debian is more stable. Another claims Ubuntu is bloated. And before you even start enjoying Linux, you're trapped in analysis paralysis. Then comes hardware compatibility. On Windows, most hardware manufacturers design their drivers specifically for it. You plug something in, and usually it just works. On Linux, things are better than they used to be, but they're not perfect. Wi-Fi adapters sometimes need manual driver installation. NVIDIA GPUs can be especially frustrating. You may install Linux and suddenly your screen resolution is wrong, your second monitor isn't detected, or your system boots into a black screen. You'll read forum posts telling you to switch from Wayland to Xorg or install proprietary drivers using terminal commands you barely understand. If you're coming from Windows, where driver installation is mostly automatic, this can feel like stepping into chaos. Gaming is another reality check. Yes, Linux gaming has improved massively. Steam's Proton compatibility layer is impressive. Many Windows games now run surprisingly well. But here's the part people don't emphasize enough. Not everything works. Anti-cheat systems in competitive multiplayer games can block Linux users. Some AAA titles refuse to launch. Performance can vary depending on the game and driver configuration. You might spend hours tweaking launch options, switching Proton versions, or editing configuration files just to get a game running properly. On Windows, you double-click and play. On Linux, sometimes you troubleshoot first and play later. Then there's software compatibility. If you rely on Adobe Creative Cloud for professional work, you'll quickly realize there's no official Linux version, no native Photoshop, no native Premiere Pro. Yes, there are alternatives like GIMP or Kdenlive, but switching workflows isn't always easy. If your job depends on specific Windows-only software, Linux can become a barrier instead of a solution. Running Windows programs through Wine can work, but it's hit or miss. Sometimes it works perfectly. Sometimes it crashes. Sometimes it installs, but certain features are broken. It's not the seamless experience people imagine. Let's talk about the terminal. Linux fans love it. Power users praise it. But for newcomers, it can be intimidating. Many troubleshooting guides assume you're comfortable typing commands with sudo privileges. You'll copy and paste lines from forums without fully understanding what they do. One wrong command can break your system. Yes, Linux gives you control, but control comes with responsibility. On Windows, you can often fix things through graphical menus. On Linux, the solution frequently involves the terminal, editing config files, or manually managing services. Another dark side is fragmentation. Because Linux is open source and customizable, different distros use different package formats. Some use .deb, others use .rpm. Then you have Snap, Flatpak, AppImage. A program might be available in one format but not another. You might install the same app from different sources and end up with duplicate entries or sandbox restrictions you didn't expect. It can feel messy compared to downloading a simple .exe file on Windows. Updates are also a double-edged sword. On Windows, forced updates are annoying. On Linux, updates are usually optional and under your control. That's great. But sometimes updates break things. A kernel update might cause hardware issues. A desktop environment update might introduce bugs. If you're using a rolling release distro, updates can occasionally destabilize your system. Suddenly, your once perfect setup behaves differently, and you have to dig through logs to figure out what changed. Community support is both a blessing and a curse. The Linux community is incredibly knowledgeable, but it can also be harsh toward beginners. Ask a simple question, and someone might respond with, "Read the manual," or "You should have searched before asking." Learning curve can feel steeper because many discussions assume technical knowledge. While there are friendly communities, the overall culture sometimes expects you to do your homework before seeking help. Let's not forget printer support. It sounds small, but it's a real issue. On Windows, most printers are plug-and-play. On Linux, you might find that your specific printer model doesn't have full support. You may need to install drivers manually or configure CUP settings. And if the manufacturer doesn't provide Linux drivers, you're dependent on community workarounds. Power management can also be inconsistent. Some laptops have shorter battery life on Linux compared to Windows due to driver optimization differences. Sleep mode might not work perfectly. You close the lid expecting your laptop to suspend, and instead it drains battery overnight. These are small frustrations, but they add up. There's also the reality of professional environments. Many workplaces are built around Windows infrastructure. Microsoft Office integration, proprietary VPN clients, specific enterprise tools. Yes, LibreOffice exists, but formatting compatibility with Microsoft Office files isn't always perfect. If you collaborate with Windows users, you might encounter document layout shifts or macro issues. Then there's the myth that Linux is automatically secure and private. While Linux is generally more transparent and less targeted by malware, security still depends on user behavior. If you install random scripts from GitHub without reviewing them, you can still compromise your system. Linux isn't magically immune to vulnerabilities. It just requires a different approach to security. Customization is another double-edged sword. On Linux, you can tweak almost everything. Themes, icons, window managers, animations, but heavy customization can lead to instability. You might install extensions that conflict with updates. You might break your desktop environment trying to make it look perfect. And sometimes you'll spend more time customizing than actually using your computer productively. Performance expectations can also be misleading. Linux can run beautifully on older hardware, but it's not magic. If your system has a slow hard drive and 4 GB of RAM, switching to Linux won't suddenly transform it into a high-end machine. Lightweight distros help, but hardware limitations still exist. Another thing no one tells you is that some tasks take longer simply because you're learning a new system. Muscle memory built over years on Windows doesn't instantly transfer. Keyboard shortcuts differ. File system structure is different. Installing software uses different logic. That adjustment period can be frustrating. And let's talk about dual booting. Many beginners start by dual booting Windows and Linux, but even that has risks. Windows updates can sometimes overwrite the bootloader. You might boot one day and find your Linux partition inaccessible until you repair grub. Managing partitions also carries the risk of accidental data loss if you're not careful. There's also the issue of niche hardware like RGB controllers, fingerprint readers, or specialized audio interfaces. Support varies widely. Some work perfectly. Others require unofficial drivers or don't work at all. Another hidden challenge is that Linux often assumes you're curious. It rewards people who like to explore, tweak, and learn. If you just want a system that behaves exactly the same every day with minimal effort, Linux might occasionally test your patience. Even software installation methods can feel inconsistent. Some apps are in repositories. Others require adding PPAs. Others provide app images you manually manage. Keeping track of where everything came from can become confusing over time. And then there's the reality of perception. When something breaks on Windows, people blame Microsoft. When something breaks on Linux, you might blame yourself because of how customizable everything is. That psychological difference matters. None of this means Linux is bad. It means Linux demands involvement. It expects you to participate in your system rather than passively consume it. For some people, that's empowering. For others, it's exhausting. Switching from Windows to Linux isn't just changing an operating system, it's changing mindset. You move from a controlled ecosystem to a decentralized one. You gain freedom, but you also inherit responsibility. The dark side of Linux isn't malware or hidden tracking. It's complexity, fragmentation, compatibility gaps, and the requirement to learn. It's the reality that sometimes things won't just work. It's the occasional late night spent reading forum threads trying to fix a driver issue. Before switching, you should ask yourself what you truly need from your computer. If you value customization, privacy, and learning, Linux can be incredible. If you rely heavily on specific Windows software, competitive gaming, or plug-and-play hardware simplicity, you might face friction. In the end, the dark side of Linux isn't about fear, it's about honesty. Linux is powerful, flexible, and often superior in many areas. But it's not perfect. And anyone telling you it's a flawless replacement for Windows is only showing you half the story. Switch wisely, explore carefully, and most importantly, know what you're getting into before you hit that install button.